The first step is to remove the rear seat bench as well as the driver rear quarter panel. The seat bench pulls directly up. The quarter panel has two 8mm sockets right there and right there. And then ultimately the rear seat has two 10mm bolts, and then it can pull up and then toward the front of the car, like such. When removing the quarter panel from behind the driver's seat, ensure that you've disconnected the tweeter from the top portion, and then remove the lower portion by using two 7mm bolts. The first is shown in this diagram on the left, and the other one is just out of this diagram to the right of that rear speaker. The third step is to remove the metal panel or bracket that holds the wiring harness. It's held on by two 10mm and three 8mm bolts. Also, it should be noted that the blue box you're seeing, you will not have in your car. That is my old line-out connector. It failed, and I actually put a new one in, and that's when I made this video. Pull out gently on the metal bracket to expose the wiring harness behind it, right there. Step 4 is pretty self-explanatory. There's about a zillion wires back there, and it looks like one big rat's nest. In order to access the wires, you need to disconnect the entire wiring harness from that black metal box. Do that by pulling the lever, just like that, and then it'll pop out. Once it's popped out, you'll expose both a gray and a black set of wires. To get those out, just pull the tabs and slide them out with your index finger. Next, you want to connect your line-out connector to the speaker lines themselves. T-taps or soldering is the most permanent method. I use T-taps, and all the wiring is shown for the kicker line-out connector that I have below. If you have a different manufacturer, you may have different instructions. Shown here is a wiring diagram for the E46, and circled here are the taps that you're trying to connect to. Once you find the wire that you're looking for, in this case, black number 24, you want to attach a T-tap like this to the wire so that you can ultimately connect it to your line-out connector. In this instance, the black connector, wire number 24, is the right negative subwoofer line. So in this case, it would attach with a T-tap to the gray black wire on my kicker LOC. This process is then completed for the other three wires on your line-out connector corresponding to the correct T-tap from the E46 diagram. This step is a little bit of your mileage may vary, but most amps will require some type of turn-on wire. If your amp requires a turn-on wire, you need to connect it to the gray connector, wire number 10. Connect your turn-on wire, which often comes in a wiring kit with your amp, in the same manner with either soldering or T-taps, to the gray connector number 10. Once you've connected your turn-on lead, you can go ahead and put all the wires back. So the gray and black sets of wires will slide back into their housing, and then the entire housing will connect to the black box using the lever, and then you can go ahead and remount them on the side quarter panel. The next step is to actually attach your RCA cables to your line-out connector, and then put everything back that you previously have ripped apart. As you can see, I've reinstalled my metal bracket that houses the wiring harness. Additionally, my LOC has been connected with double-sided tape. Lastly, my RCA cables follow the red line and ultimately go from the side door panel behind my rear seat, like such, and into the trunk. My line-out connector will be held in place with double-sided tape, and then the RCA cables run behind everything and behind my back seat. Once you have the cables ran where you're going to put your amp, go ahead and put all your trim back. The next step is to connect your amp using the instructions that came with it. What I'm going to give you here is instructions for my specific equipment or just general instructions shown below. So this is a pretty standard wiring diagram, and most of these we've accomplished in different steps as seen here. This is a photo of my Rockford Fosgate amp, and ultimately I want to input the two RCA cables as well as a ground, power, and the remote turn-on switch, all of which are circled. Because I have a convertible, I wanted to maintain as much trunk space as possible. So my amp is mounted on top of my spare tire on the plastic portion. The wires run from through the ski bypass, as it's called, around the toolkit, and ultimately to my amp itself. The ground wire connects to the BMW ground. It's very important that it's actually connected to the car ground and not the battery ground. BMW does have a car ground. It's the connection of brown wires in the back left of your trunk. Your amp wiring kit should also have a positive wire that connects to the positive portion of your battery lead and oftentimes has a fuse built in. The next step is to mount the sub where you want it and ultimately wire it. I had a local high school wood program that made my sub mount in the ski bypass for me, which basically uses the trunk as the box, so pretty nifty. But ultimately you just run wire from your amplifier to your subwoofer, and then you'll be good to go. The last step is to tune your amp. I chose to do this with a multimeter, but it does involve a little bit of math. What you're looking to do is find the desired volts using the equation below. So for instance, my amp is 300 watts, and I have a 2 ohm resistance on my sub. The square root of 600 is about 24 volts. So I simply bring my gain all the way down and then slowly raise it as that 50 hertz tone plays. So connect your multimeter to your 2 speaker outputs from your amp, and then slowly raise the gain until you get the desired voltage. Mine is about 24.